अस्सलामुअलैकुम। ईद ग़दीर तमाम मोमिनीन को, हिदायत टीवी के तमाम व्यूअर्स को बहुत बहुत मुबारक। आज के मुबारक दिन बल्कि इस पूरे हफ्ते में हम आपको मुसलसल ईद की मुबारक भी देते रहेंगे और इसकी खुशी में जितनी भी सेलिब्रेशन कर सकते हैं करेंगे, क्योंकि ये दिन इतना अहम है मोमिनीन की ज़िंदगी में कि इसका जितना जिक्र किया जाए कम है। आज आगाही के इस प्रोग्राम में एक नई आगाही के साथ हम आपके सामने हाजिर हैं और आज हमने जिस गेस्ट को दावत दी है वो माशाल्लाह एक बहुत ही अच्छी सर्विस जो कि इंस्पिरेशनल माइंड्स के नाम से जानी जाती है, उसकी फाउंडर है। शी इज़ अ होलिस्टिक therapeutic life coach. She is also a learning disabilities nurse. इन्होंने बहुत काम किया है मेंटल हेल्थ की फील्ड में और माशाल्लाह 10-15 साल से वो खिदमत अंजाम दे रही हैं। और आज जिस टॉपिक को हम डिस्कस करेंगे आज के प्रोग्राम में वो है लर्निंग डिसेबिलिटीज और चैलेंजिंग बिहेवियर। आपकी ज़िंदगी में, हमारी ज़िंदगी में अक्सर और बेशतर हम ऐसे मौके या ऐसे एक्सपीरियंस से गुजरते हैं जब हम देखते हैं कि कोई बच्चा या इवन कोई एडल्ट किसी मुश्किल से गुजर रहा हो जहाँ पे पढ़ाई लिखाई की बात आती है। कुछ बच्चे आप देखते होंगे कि वो लिखने में तो बहुत अच्छे हैं लेकिन रीडिंग में कमजोर हैं, और कुछ बच्चे ऐसे होंगे जो जिनकी रीडिंग बहुत अच्छी होगी लेकिन लिखने में उन्हें दिक्कत होती है, और कुछ ऐसे होंगे जिनका रीडिंग और राइटिंग स्किल्स तो ठीक होंगे लेकिन जहाँ बात आती है हिसाब किताब की, मैथमेटिक्स की, तो उसमें उनको बहुत ही ज्यादा तकलीफ का सामना होता है और उनको अक्सर लोग स्लो लर्नर कहते हैं या उनको अक्सर लोग समझ नहीं पाते और उन पे काफ़ी मतलब चीख चिल्लाव किया जाता है उन बच्चों पे, उनको डाँटा जाता है, कभी-कभी पनिशमेंट्स भी दी जाती हैं कि ये बच्चा पढ़ाई-लिखाई में अच्छा नहीं है या ये पढ़ना नहीं चाहता। बजाय इसके कि हम मसले की बुनियाद को समझ सकें, हम फ़ौरन उस शख्स को या उस बच्चे को लेबलाइज़ करना शुरू कर देते हैं। तो हम बात करते हैं फरहाना हिरजी करवली से। अस्सलाम वालेकुम।
Alaikum salam. How are you? कैसे हैं?
अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह। ईद मुबारक जी सिस्टर।
Eid Mubarak to you too.
Thank you so much for coming on the show today. And the topic is learning disabilities and the challenging behaviors that are associated with it. So first of all, I would request you, Farzana, to tell us about Inspirational Mind. What made you come up with this concept?
My background is in nursing and social work, so I have a very holistic um, um, look at both the services, so I can understand how health has an impact on our social needs and social needs have an impact on our health needs. So my work within hospital work in particular made me realize that many people from our own communities are not accessing the help when they need to very early on in life. If they're unwell, they may not engage with health professionals in time, may not be looking at taking medication that being given and things like that. So seeing a lot of people, even if they've lost a loved one, they're not getting the help that they need. If somebody, a mother has died of cancer in the family and leaving children behind, why are our community members not accessing help? Why do they refuse and struggle on their own? And because of that, I thought, let me try and work towards finding out and also resolving some issues if I could. So that's when I decided to set up the service Inspirational Minds.
And what does this service offer?
So the service helps people with any health, social and emotional issues. So we look at mental health, we look at physical health, and we look at any social needs as well. And we try and refer people to people within the community if that's a preference, and we have the relevant professional there, which alhamdulillah we have a good team of professionals. If it means that we need to support them, signposting them out to different services, or giving them some advice on how to speak to the GP, how to speak to different services, help them to understand what their own issues are before they engage with other professionals. So we're quite, we work in many different ways to support people.
And what about the language barriers? Say, for example, there is someone who doesn't speak English. Do they have any access to professionals who are bilingual?
Yes, so we provide Urdu, we provide Gujarati. Sometimes if we don't, the person that answers the call is unable to speak a particular language, we can try our best to find somebody that can speak that language and support them. And the other thing is, if we do refer out, we will advise them. For example, if we refer them to go to the local council for social support, we'll advise them to request an interpreter because the council will provide an interpreter. So those discussions can be had quite early on.
Brilliant. That sounds absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, Farzana, for sharing that with us. So, jumping into the topic, please tell us what learning disability is, because lots of people, they don't understand that there is such a thing, and like I mentioned earlier on, that they tend to kind of labelize or stigmatize the problem, and they kind of tell off people or children that they're not working hard enough, they're not paying attention in their class, although that is not the case.
Yeah, so there's two kinds. There's learning disability and there's learning difficulties. So learning disabilities is a delay. So when we have the milestones, when the children are growing, they walk at a certain time, they talk at a certain time, they can interact with other people, and we notice that these things aren't happening early on. It can take a very long time. There is definitely a delay in their development. It could be due to oxygen deprivation when they're born. It could be due to trauma in early childhood, soon after birth. It could be many factors that can cause a learning disability, and it could even be genetic. So obviously we know that, for example, Down syndrome, where there is a genetic defect. So there's some learning disabilities that come about due to genetic issues. So there are many different reasons for learning disabilities. And that delays somebody's ability to understand maybe their cognitive, in other words, their mental growth. Even sometimes the formation of the brain could be affected. So there's many different aspects of a learning disability. And then we have a learning difficulty, which is where people struggle or are very slightly mildly affected in understanding some things. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not able to do other things. So for example, myself, I have dyslexia. And I wasn't aware of that until I realized that I was struggling with maths, and that's something I couldn't pick up very quickly. And maybe a little bit of English reading I used to struggle with in very early days. But alhamdulillah, you know, it's not set me back in any ways. In fact, sometimes Allah may give us something extra to compensate, which I feel I have. To something that's missing from us. So what we need to understand as a baseline really is that people are so different and we all come with different gifts. If that means that one gift somebody has more and other gifts somebody has less, that doesn't make them less of a person. We are all equal and we should try and understand each other. And I guess that leads on to the topic of challenging behaviors, that, you know, trying to understand the person's behaviors. Why is somebody with a learning disability, and actually even generally in life, why do people behave the way they behave? And that's really what we need to look at.
Definitely, because if we don't understand someone's behavior and then we stigmatize the problem and make it even worse, and then the symptoms get aggravated, and then it leads to another problems. So you mentioned that you've got dyslexia as well. I'm so grateful to you for sharing that with us. When did you recognize it as a problem, or when did your family acknowledge it, that this is like a problem which is completely beyond your control?
I don't think we recognized it early on. In those days, when I was growing up, it wasn't something that was, you know, recognized very easily. Even the teachers really didn't pick up on anything. They just found that obviously I was lagging behind a little bit. I think the issue was that I, in myself, was unhappy that I wasn't able to meet the standards that everyone else was meeting. I was always putting my hand up in class to ask questions. And I think they would find that I'm actually becoming a bit of a nuisance. But I genuinely didn't understand something. It took me a few goes to read and reread and understand before I could, you know, pick it up. That it was picked up when I actually got to university. So I had failed a lot of exams before that. And alhamdulillah, obviously with Allah's grace, I managed to get to university. It may have taken a bit longer, but I did get there. And it was at university that I was able to be diagnosed with a learning difficulty, dyslexia, which was very helpful, because then I knew that I had to find other ways to do things. And I think that's the key. It doesn't mean if you can't do something, you stop. It means find another way to do things. And even with our children, if we see that they can't do something, we don't keep pushing them in that direction of learning. There must be another way to teach them the same thing.
Definitely. And like you just mentioned, that it doesn't mean you should stop, because lots of people, their understanding of a learning disability is that a person who's suffering from learning disability can't progress in life, can't achieve anything. But you're, mashallah, a living example of someone who has, despite this, has achieved so much in life, mashallah. And this just proves that it's not a life-limiting problem. It's something that can maybe restrict you in certain areas, but then again, there are so many other areas you can explore. Tell us something about dyslexia. How does it kind of affect one's learning ability?
I think it really depends. I mean, when I was being diagnosed, they asked me things like, when you look at something on a screen, does it actually move up and down? Does it change colors? Does it change size? Now, I never had any of that. My issue was literally around understanding. So even if I read something, I've noticed I used to read again and again and again, and it never used to kind of focus was a big issue. It never used to go in. I didn't totally understand it straight away. So I had to learn other ways. So I used to sit with a pen and underline, and go back to things. I used to highlight certain things. I used to rewrite it because the ability to rewrite helped me to reabsorb, if that makes sense. So I had to try different ways to kind of learn.
You mentioned about Down syndrome, and then we've got Asperger's, for example. How are they all kind of linked with each other, and do they all have the same impact on one's life?
So some people can have a learning disability, and they can have a dual learning disability. So they may have some kind of developmental delay and autism with it. A lot of the time, people with learning disabilities may also have a mental health issue. Very much so, because of, I think you mentioned a bit earlier that obviously if we don't handle some of the challenges or issues early on, or we don't notice them or support the person through those issues, then other issues can occur. In the same way, if we don't support somebody through their issues, they may end up developing a self-image about themselves that makes them feel very low, because we haven't treated them in a way that's respectful to them, and that can contribute to mental health. So people with learning disabilities may end up having a dual diagnosis because of the learning disability and the mental health or other issues with the learning disability. Otherwise, I mean, learning disabilities generally are some level of delay. It's the reason for delay or the characteristics or the behaviors that come with that defines the different types of learning disability.
So for people who haven't recognized the symptoms as yet, and they are kind of just blaming the child or the adult for not working hard enough or not being focused, what are the symptoms that they should look out? What are the red flags they should look out for in order to distinguish that this is a learning disability and it's not just the person being slow to learn?
So even if you think that it is the person being slow to learn, I think the question we always have to ask is why. Not why are they not doing the same as everyone else. That's not what we should be looking at. We need to look at each person as an individual. Why are they struggling to learn? What are the issues? If it's communication, how do they communicate with me? What are they saying? If it's, again, it goes back to behaviors. If it turns out that when you give them a piece of work, they just throw the book in the air and what we see as a tantrum is actually them communicating that actually you're giving me something, I don't understand it. Every time you bring me this, you get angry at me because I don't understand what you want me to do. And you're not listening to me when I tell you I don't understand. So then eventually that becomes behavior. So I think the question always has to be why. Why is there an issue here? If you can't understand yourself, then get professional support. Find out from somebody else who has, professional background. And the best way to start this process is to go to the GP.
Okay. And what about speech difficulty or children who may be able to read and write, but when it comes to speaking, they find it quite challenging? Is that linked to the learning disability as well?
Not necessarily. There are learning disabilities where people are unable to speak and express through verbal ways. They may express through other avenues. And it could even be a difficulty. I mean, even if, you know, one of us, God forbid, has a stroke, again, it would affect our speech. So it's something that can occur at any point in life. And I think, again, to get support from that would be via the GP. That would be the best avenue. But if the child is in school, work very closely with the school, have conversations with the school and say, you know, my child isn't understanding this from what I can see at home. My child is struggling with this. And be really open and honest with your conversations, because maybe the school have seen something too, but they don't know whether you're seeing it at home. Unless those conversations happen, you will not be able to get to the bottom of what the issue is.
Definitely. And talking about challenging behaviors, Farzana, there are so many, problems out there that are associated with challenging behavior, whether it's ADHD, whether it's autism, Asperger's, and the list goes on. For caregivers, for family members, for like relatives and friends, how can this support an individual who's going through this difficulty?
So I think support can be given via the school. A lot of the time the school can, give you ideas of how to manage, because they've obviously worked with the child through a certain amount, certain amount of time at school. So whatever they're using at school, whatever methods that are working for them at school, they can advise you, and you can use those methods at home. If I think it's very much worth connecting with social services very early on. Just even if you're not willing, happy to take any services from them, but just engage in having an assessment done. There's no harm in being assessed, for your child to be assessed, to understand where the gaps are. You may learn from that. You may get tips. As a parent, we don't have an instruction manual and we don't know everything. We learn as we go along. So why not get an assessment done where we can actually learn more from a professional that's actually, worked in the field? And I found that, obviously, being a learning disabilities nurse, a lot of the time people have struggled and tried to manage things themselves and not totally understood their child, because they fully haven't had an understanding of the issues that the child may be going through. So just having an assessment can help identify areas that the parent may have never identified.
And obviously, there will be support that is offered to the caregivers or the parents as well, because the family will be frustrated because they are unable to communicate with the child, and the child feels frustrated that my family doesn't understand me. And that frustration can lead to so many other problems within the family, like relationship problems and so many other things. For those who are already, like, say, for example, diagnosed with Asperger's or autism or ADHD, the challenging behaviors that are quite commonly seen, because you work as a learning disability nurse as well, I'm sure you have come across a lot of challenging behaviors in your professional life. Can you give us some examples so we can get an understanding of the situation as well, what it's like?
So initially, I want to kind of get you to understand that there is a difference between somebody that's if we look at it this way, when there's a conflict between two people, there's a difference to when there's challenging behavior. Through challenging behavior, there is a message that needs to be picked up. Whereas within a conflict, you're trying to understand why there's a dynamic issue between the two. What we end up doing is taking challenging behavior and making it a conflict. It ends up being a conflict between either the parent and the child, or whoever else it is with the person that has a learning disability. Instead of making it a conflict, just see it as an expression of the person and try and understand what the issue is. Now, we need to look at, behaviors could be in many different ways. It could be verbal. So, if it's a child or an adult, it could be, verbal aggression. It could be screaming and shouting. It could be just repeating words again and again and again, because you just want the person to understand what you're trying to say. Physical things would be things like, scratching, biting, hitting, hair pulling, and we just straight away react with such behaviors that we see. We don't stop and say, hang on a minute, let's just sit down. The Prophet just said, if somebody's angry, give them a glass of water. Maybe you could do that. Sit down, calm down, ask them, what are you trying to tell me? I'm not understanding. There's no harm in saying that, you know. Give them a hug, which may take them by surprise. Obviously, if they're, you know, really aggressive, you don't want to try and hug them because you'll end up getting hurt. But what I'm trying to say is always de-escalate the situation. Yes, don't escalate it further by making it a conflict. De-escalate it and try and calm the situation down. So there's a lot of non-verbal behaviors as well, such as stealing, such as damaging property, breaking things, such as pacing up and down. You see people that are anxious, they will be pacing up and down, you know, because they've got something to tell you and you're not able to understand it. There is also another behavior that we see a lot in people with quite severe learning disabilities mostly, and it's called picker, and that means that they will pick up anything and eat it, whatever they find. It generally tends to be organic things like grass and leaves and mud and stuff like that, but it could be anything that they find. They will just pick it up, look at it and eat it. And it could be a way of them trying to deal with something or try and get some form of stimulation, you know, that would help them to feel. They're not feeling anything. They're not feeling love, they're not feeling warmth, they're not feeling anger, they're not feeling anything. So to get that feeling, they would pick things up and eat just to get some kind of sensation or stimulation. Does that help answer the question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, it seems like one area that gets affected is being unable to perceive the consequences of certain actions or behavior. For example, like one person may understand that this is edible or this is not edible, but here it seems that there is a sort of like challenge that the person experiences in terms of understanding things that are harmful, things that are not harmful, or what will be the consequence of certain actions and behavior. It seems like there's an inability to understand that.
Yeah, so that's where the delay is. So it might be the risk of opening the door and just walking out into the middle of the road, you know, because they don't realize what safety is, you know, jumping into a hot bath of water or, you know, going for a shower, they'll switch it on hot, not understanding the fact that you need to mix the cold and the hot together to warm, things that we take for granted, you know. But what we end up doing in situations like this is never letting that child grow. So that child with a learning disability, for example, has become a teenager. And every day we sit and put their bath on for them or shower on for them, mix the water and then leave it. Now you can go in. When will they pick up the skills? The problem is we need to have patience to not make them learn a skill, but reinforce it again and again. And eventually by pattern, they may learn. They may not learn the way we learn. But if we do something on a very regular basis and keep a very stringent kind of time frame, very good pattern in the day of structure, then that child may start to form some level of, I don't like the word normality, but then we always bring people to our norm. Normality doesn't really exist because every person is different. But just so that they can be maybe more part of the family, we need to be able to still continually try and teach them abilities to become more independent rather than kind of pull them away from things and say, no, you can't do that. You've never been able to do that. So I won't let you switch on the bath, or I won't, you know. That also can affect them emotionally, that, you know, I have nothing to do. I am worthless, you know. So we need to really balance out how we work with people with learning disabilities.
You know, there's this stigma, stereotype attached that people who are experiencing one of these problems, they don't get to live an like independent life. For the rest of their life, they're dependent on other people, on their families or friends or relatives, and they can't like get an education, they can't get a job, they can't have healthy family relationships. Is that the case, Farzana?
Definitely not. And that's what we advocate in social services and in the NHS, being a nurse and a social worker. I remember when I was nursing, there was a couple, a Down syndrome couple, that got married and had children. And everyone thought, well, how will they manage? You know, they have a learning disability. And actually, their child did not have a learning disability. So the child was, you know, it was fine. They were meeting all their milestones. But behind them was the support of families, and that was all discussed. So when this couple wanted to get married, obviously they're seeing that it's normal to get married, so they liked each other and they said, we want to get married. But obviously they would not be able to manage a marriage that even we struggle with in marriages. You know, it's not easy to maintain a marriage. So particularly with somebody with a learning disability, it's going to be even more difficult. How can we make that easier for them? So we engaged with the families. Let's work together and try and make this marriage work. You know, they wanted to have a child. Their families were very happy to support this one child's coming into the world. And mashallah, they had a beautiful child. So they can get married as long as there's a support network behind them, you know, so there's no reason why not. I mean, things like living independently, as a social worker, we're always advocating independent living. There may be things like floating support, which is a service that of support workers that go in to check on the person with a learning disability. Usually it's a mild learning disability, sometimes moderate, where a care worker would go in and check on them every day, 3 times a day, but they were still independent in making their own meals, and you know, they were supported to go shopping or pay for things or go to the bank because that's where they were finding things difficult. So anything can be done as long as we understand the person's needs, understand the person's ability, and then find a way to support them.
You know, we're talking about challenging behaviors, Farzana, and apart from children, even adults, they show these same kind of behaviors, even in elderly, especially the ones who are living in, say, for example, care homes, or even in our families, if they have dementia or Parkinson's or any other difficulty that they're experiencing, that can be pretty challenging for the caregiver, for the person who's made in charge to look after them. Especially leaving them unattended can be pretty dangerous as well, because they're unable to look after themselves or keep themselves safe. How do you deal with that?
So within social services, again, it's worth, whether it's an elderly person or somebody that's you know, had a health condition that can be debilitating, where you're having to look after them, like a stroke or Parkinson's or something like that, or even like you mentioned, dementia. It's worth getting an assessment by social services under the Care Act. So if you look at the Care Act, it states clearly that social services have an obligation to do an assessment. They don't have an obligation to provide a service, because the service is dependent on the needs of the person that they're assessing. Yeah, so obviously they will then advise you. If there's no reason to provide a service, they will give you advice. If there is a reason to provide a service, or if it is a carer that's struggling, they can assess the carer as well and do a carer's assessment. And so if the carer needs a few hours to go and do shopping, or maybe to spend time at the mosque, or, you know, meet a friend to help them with their own mental health and their own sanity, you know, to be able to function again as their carer, then the council will provide hours of care to the person that has the disability or is unwell, so that the carer is able to get on with their life and maybe attend a yoga class, even whatever it is that makes them feel that they're capable of going back to the caring role.
I was thinking, you mentioned, say for example, going to the mosque. I think our Islamic centers and mosques, they play like a vital role in the lives of, you know, people. And for those who are suffering from some kind of disability, whether it's physical or mental, I think our mosques have kind of failed to cater the needs of people who are going through these difficult, you know, periods in life. Do you think Inspirational Mind offered some kind of like help in this area?
So yes, I'm also part of Inspirational Minds on the ground as well. So there's no reason why I can't support people to communicate with their local communities in different ways and ideas of how somebody with a learning disability can be supported. I can say that within our community, alhamdulillah, we're very lucky that within the London Mosque, Stanmore, that we get the support, in the sense that all the sports services are very well aware of the needs of people with a learning disability or physical disability, and have ensured that they can cater for them in whichever way they can. Even within the classes that happen during Muharram and Ramadan and any other classes through the year, you know, that parents are initially allowed to allow that child to settle in. It may take a while, and then another support person from the Jamaat can go in and help that person to be able to feel part of the class. You know, so support is there. The thing is that a lot of us are very scared when we see somebody with a learning disability. We don't want to hurt them or their family member. So what we do is we don't ask, how can we help? We turn around and go the other way because we are scared ourselves. And I think that's the issue, that if we all have a better understanding of what a learning disability is or a physical disability is and how we can help, then we'd feel a bit more confident, you know, in being able to offer help. It doesn't mean that the family member is going to feel bad if you say something wrong. You're learning. Just as that family member, when they had a child with a learning disability, had to learn, you are learning. There is no shame in asking questions and saying, look, we don't understand. Please tell us how we can help. Rather than being worried about, I'm going to offend somebody, it's better I just stay away.
Yeah, because I've seen young mothers who are struggling with children with autism or ADHD or any other, mental health or physical disability, for example. When they come to the mosque and if the child is showing some kind of like challenging behavior, then the entire community, they just kind of stare at them, look at them like as if it's the mother's fault or it's the child's fault, because there's not enough understanding and awareness about the subject. Do you think in our mosque, especially in our madrasas, we should have like an area or a class that is kind of uh, specifically for children with challenging behaviors or children who are suffering from learning disabilities? Because I don't think our madrasas are as fully equipped as the schools that children go to in this country.
Definitely. So again, I can give an example of the Hujjat Stanmore Madrasa. They have special needs services that started off very early on, which I was part of many years ago, and it's been running for many years now. Started off very small, and now obviously we've got a lot of children that have learning disabilities, and so it's been split into younger group and older group. But we don't expect that the child with the learning disability doesn't attend their normal class to be with their normal aged peers. We don't want to socially isolate them. So we've got enough volunteers, alhamdulillah, always requiring more. But at the moment, alhamdulillah, there are, we're managing with the volunteers that we have that are going in and supporting each child individually within the class. So the child is not left isolated from people their age. And they're also able to understand to the level that they can understand. They don't have to understand everything in the class, but resources can be taken in, maybe more visual resources to help them to understand, like for example, if it's a topic on the Kaaba, rather than just reading from a book, take in some Lego, take in bits of Play-Doh, build a Kaaba, walk around it with your fingers. Make it sensory, make it more interesting. Things like this can be done with our children. We just need more volunteers to understand and come forward and say, I'm happy to help, or I would like to help. Can we set up something like this? Initially it can be with the parents. I know it's difficult. Parents want a bit of time away, but it can be the parents of people with learning disabilities that can initiate this themselves, get together, find out who else within the community is struggling, and work together.
Maybe
if we work
form a
together, we
support
can
group.
achieve. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I think most people don't know or they don't realize a lot of famous like celebrities and public figures who have achieved so much, mashallah, in life, they have some form of learning disability, and they continue to live normal lives. They can tend to like get a good job and have healthy family relationships. But I think in certain communities, there's a lot of stigma attached around learning disabilities. And they feel that if a child or an adult is showing challenging behavior, it's something to do with their upbringing or it's the parents' fault. Um, You mentioned about like there are support groups out there and how in our communities we can like come together and support each other instead of being scared or being fearful of the other person that they'll get offended. It's good to communicate. It's good to talk. We discussed a lot about dyslexia and learning disability. What about people who may not have a disability, but it's just that they struggle? For example, there's so many types, and we discussed a few of them. I would like you to give some more examples and discuss a few more types so we get a better understanding.
Of difficulties.
Yes,
Um, I mean, each difficulty may not be a standard learning difficulty. There's so many. I mean, it would be difficult to go through a list. But what I would say is, if you are struggling with something, whatever it is, whether it's a physical health, mental health issue, or a learning difficulty, it doesn't matter what you're struggling with. We're very fortunate within this country that we can reach out and get support and be supported to understand what's wrong with us or what's wrong with our child. I mean, I've had referrals through Inspirational Minds of parents saying, I just don't understand why or what's going on with my child. And they've come really anxious and really worked up that they're just very upset. You have to
yeah,
settle them down and try and break down. So what is it you're seeing? What don't you understand? Where are you struggling? And it's as simple as that, just to have a conversation with somebody to help you clear out all the anxiety and all the upset that you have around what you're struggling with. A lot of the time we lose sight of what we're struggling with and we end up focusing on how we feel about it more than what the actual issue is. So having a conversation with your GP, making a referral to social services, or asking the GP to put you forward to talking therapies or something like that, where you can get some professional support in discussing your emotions and anxieties around an issue that you haven't even recognized. And maybe
yes,
through that, you can recognize where the difficulty is. It doesn't have to be a disability. A lot of the time, a disability is a lot easier to see than a difficulty. A
yes,
difficulty is very deeply embedded because as a human being, we have an innate ability to be able to deal with things and manage tasks. Even it can be unconsciously that we're doing it. So when we get up as a child and we realize that we can't walk, we crawl. We'll find another
yes,
way around. We may be
yes,
very late in walking, and when we feel safe and able to, we will then start walking. Why did we do that? Because we found it was something we couldn't do. We couldn't just stand up like an adult, so we continued to crawl. Or we'll find a funny way of hopping, maybe. I don't know. I mean, that's just an example. But
yeah,
we always find ways to manage a situation. So we need to, even as adults, just imagine the amount of years that you've managed that issue, and to the point that you don't even realize what the issue is. So it
yeah,
needs to be broken down. And the only way you can do that is have a conversation with the GP, or any other professional that you know, or even a friend, somebody that can sit with a pen and paper and map out all the issues that you're experiencing to get to the bottom of what this difficulty might be.
yeah. And I think people need to understand more that people, I mean, who have children with ADHD or autism or dyslexia, it's nothing to do with bad parenting. It's like purely genetic, and it's something to do with brain chemistry, something which is beyond your control. Yes, a healthy family environment does play a crucial role, but you can't blame the parents or the grandparents, for example. And I think instead of being judgmental, we need to be more supportive of these individuals. And if we know someone in our family, in our community, or friends, I think we should be there supporting them instead of judging them and even creating more problems for them. Um, Farzana, because you work as a learning disabilities nurse and you also work as a therapeutic, holistic life coach, if somebody needs to, say, for example, approach a life coach, what areas do you work in? How can you offer support?
I'm holistic because of my experience in nursing and social work. So, it's in regards to mental health, or it's in regards to social issues, marital issues, um, supporting a family through obviously issues around challenging behavior and learning disabilities or difficulties. I'm quite flexible in the kind of service I provide, and it's always catered to the specific need in person. The only area I don't work in is employment. So apart from that, because Alhamdulillah, I've been very blessed, and I would put that down to my difficulty. If I hadn't had my learning difficulty, I may have been somebody else doing something else. But Alhamdulillah, Allah has gifted me with the ability to be very rounded in what I can provide as a service. So I think it's always worth to pick up the phone and just have a conversation to see how support can be given. If it's not with me, with anyone, there's no harm. What can they say? Well, unfortunately, I can't provide support. However, there might be somebody else that can, and they may have those details on hand for you.
Yeah, or the GP can refer it, or you can even contact your local council, and they should be able to help as well.
Definitely.
And because you're quite active in Stanmore and Hirji, and I'm sure a lot of people, they approach inspirational minds to get the advice or guidance that they require. I think every mosque, every Islamic center should have like a team or a service for mental health. And because the need is there, there's a desperate need to get professional help, but it's just that people, they don't feel comfortable in approaching professional because of the stigma attached to mental health. But I mean, the kind of challenges we're facing right now with the lockdown and the coronavirus and the pandemic, people are losing like their family members, their loved ones, and they may have lost their jobs. So there's a lot of psychological like pressure. There's a lot of stress and anxiety around the unpredictability of the future, and that can also aggravate people who already have mental health issues. So how can they cope with all these triggers?
So even obviously, I've been speaking to a lot of parents that have children with learning disabilities. They're not getting a break that they used to get. So they're 24/7 with the child, whether it's them waking up at night to support the child to go to the toilet, or when, they have been to the toilet to support them to clean themselves up. And then you're on shift again in the morning because the child's not going to school. It's very difficult at the moment during lockdown, and more so now that we're in the summer holidays as well. So I think all of us have a duty to reach out to people that we know may be alone or struggling or have somebody with a disability at home. We all, as human beings, as Muslims, have that responsibility, that we should at least try and keep in touch with one person at least and ask them how we can help, even if it means going in for half an hour to support somebody that you know, or even that's a neighbor that you don't know, get to know them, and even just having a chat with them, so that rather than, what a lot of the time when we've got young children, we feel very, numb in the head sometimes, that we haven't been able to have an adult conversation with somebody. So just imagine somebody that's caring for somebody that's physically disabled, or, have a learning disability. After a while, they're going to want to have some kind of communication with somebody that can kind of give them a bit more stimulation, get their brain running. And I think even if we can't go and help, we can always give them a call, ask how they are, maybe bring them some shopping and things like that.
Yeah, and I think our religion specifically kind of puts a lot of emphasis on the fact that we should be like a supportive, we should form a supportive network for each other, and we should always be there to offer any kind of support, whether it's physical, emotional, financial, spiritual, for our brothers and sisters out there. And I mean, we're talking about mental health or physical health. It's not something that is recent. People have been struggling with these things since we came to this world. So the problems were there, but then there are options out there to seek help. Just because you've got a problem or a difficulty doesn't mean you should restrict yourself. You shouldn't live a normal life, because there's help out there. There's so many organizations that you can approach to get that help. Language shouldn't be a barrier. Faith or culture shouldn't be a barrier either, because you've got bilingual therapists, bilingual psychologists, and nurses. Before we end off the program, because we only have 7 minutes left, Farzana, what tip, what advice, or your message that you would like to give us, and especially for those people who have a family member or a loved one who is going through learning disability or challenging behavior?
So as the topic also looks at challenging behaviours, I just want to give maybe a couple of minutes on that if I can, on how
Please.
to understand what the child or adult is saying to you. And I think the best way to do that is to keep a diary or map, mind map or something, and record the types of behaviours that are happening. And if they're repetitive, put like a tally chart that it's repeated behaviours. Maybe the time of day that the behaviours are happening. So map out when it occurs, where it occurs. Is it in a particular room? Maybe they don't like that room. Maybe it's too noisy for them and they need somewhere that's peaceful and calming. You know, maybe it's too dark for them. So you've got to understand
Yeah.
where it happens, what time of day, you know, with whom. Do they have their siblings in the room at the same time? Do they have a friend there? You know, why is that happening?
Yeah.
And look for a pattern as to what is this behavior telling me. You know, it might be that the child or the adult is understimulated. So that doesn't mean put in front of them a book of maths or English and try and get them to learn, or nursery rhymes. It could
Yeah.
mean, you know, change the lighting, give them something to feel, like a bit of Play-Doh or something.
Yeah.
And if they're overstimulated, take them somewhere where they can calm down, where there's cushions and soft furnishings, where they can feel comfortable and start to relax, and kind of, you know, the strobe lighting, light, kind of little lights and stuff that make them feel comfortable so they can start to relax. We need to implement that. And particularly right now in lockdown, for example, a lot of parents are saying that they're not getting the ability to break away from their children. They're not getting
Yes.
time out. The children aren't getting time out. A lot of the time what I've said is just build a little corner in the house, whether it's
Yeah.
using a tent, using pillows and things like that. Build a little corner in the house and call that the timeout corner or the comfort corner. Rather than obviously having a corner where you're going to punish a child and say you've been behaving badly, go there. Why not you
Yeah.
as a parent go into that corner and say, I'm going there to just chill and calm down, and when I'm feeling better I will come out. When that child sees you do that, they eventually would want to do that. It becomes a normal place to go and calm down, you know. So it's another way of de-escalating behaviors.
And there may be people who may be struggling with, say, for example, in certain areas of their life, they may be extremely intelligent when it comes to studies and performance in school. Well, when it comes to their like IQ, it must be really high. But when it comes to emotional intelligence, they may be struggling in that area. So, as we know that no human being is perfect, we all lack something, but Allah has created us in a way that we've got one thing to compensate for the other. We just need to look at the positive aspects and just kind of continue with the struggle by having that faith in Allah and in ourselves. Thank you so much, Farzana, for joining us today and
Thank you. Thank
talking
you for
about
having
such
me.
an important topic. Inshallah, we'll definitely have you again on the show. For those of you watching, instead of stigmatizing the problem or the situation and looking at the negative side of things and reacting in an aggressive or violent manner if somebody's showing challenging behavior, it's always best to take a moment and reflect on why this person is behaving in a certain manner. And instead of labelizing the person as being lazy or not working hard enough, maybe the child is experiencing some form of difficulty in learning. Maybe there is a reason behind that child's behavior. Inshallah, we'll meet you next Saturday with a new topic to spread awareness over something new related to mental health. Take care of yourselves, and once again, Eid Ghadir Mubarak.